My name is Beverly, and I'm 29 years old. 3 weeks ago, I thought I was living a fairy tale. I had saved every penny for 3 years to afford the wedding of my dreams, complete with a $5,000 custom cake that looked like something straight out of a magazine. My sister Madison had always been the type to ask for things, but I never imagined she'd go this far. When I refused to buy her a condo for her 22nd birthday, I knew she was upset, but what happened next at my wedding reception changed everything between us forever. Before I tell you what happened next, let me know where you're watching from and hit that like button. Trust me, you won't believe what my own sister did on what was supposed to be the happiest day of my life. I work as a marketing manager at a mid-sized tech company in Denver, and for the past 3 years, I had been saving every extra dollar I could for my wedding to Robert. We met in college, and he's this amazing software engineer who somehow puts up with my crazy family dynamics. I had dreamed of this day since I was a little girl, and I was determined to make it perfect. My relationship with my sister Madison has always been complicated. She's 7 years younger than me, and from the day she was born, our parents treated her like she could do no wrong. When Madison was 5 and broke my favorite doll, Mom said I should have been more careful where I left it. When she was 12 and crashed the bike I had saved up to buy with my babysitting money, Dad said accidents happen and bought her a new one while I had to walk everywhere for months. The pattern continued as we got older. When Madison wanted to go to an expensive private college, guess who got asked to help with tuition? When she wanted a car for her 16th birthday but Mom and Dad couldn't afford the payments, guess who co-signed the loan? When she decided she needed a complete designer wardrobe for Sorority Rush, guess who got the guilt trip about being a good big sister? Robert had watched this dynamic for years. He'd seen me hand over thousands of dollars to Madison while putting off buying things I needed. He'd listened to me cry after family gatherings where Madison got praised for her latest accomplishment while my hard work went unnoticed. But he never pushed me to change the pattern. He just supported me and hoped I'd eventually see what everyone else could see clearly. The latest request had come 6 weeks before my wedding. Madison was graduating from college and turning 22, and she had decided she deserved a condo as a combination graduation and birthday gift. Not just any condo, mind you, but a luxury 2-bedroom unit in the trendy part of downtown that cost more than most people make in 2 years. Mom and Dad supported the idea completely. "Beverly, you're doing so well in your career," Mom had said during our weekly phone call. "Madison needs a good start in life, and you're in the perfect position to help her. Think of it as an investment in her future." Dad had chimed in with his usual refrain. "Your sister looks up to you so much. You've always been her role model. Don't you want to see her succeed?" But here's the thing they didn't understand or chose to ignore. I had already spent $35,000 on my wedding. I had been planning and saving for this day for years, choosing every detail carefully to stay within our budget. Robert and I were also trying to save for a house of our own. We were both tired of renting and wanted to start building equity and a real life together. The $5,000 cake had been one of my few splurges. I had found Gerald, this incredible cake artist who had trained in Paris and created these masterpieces that looked more like sculpture than food. When I saw his portfolio, I knew I had to have one of his creations for my special day. The cake was going to be 4 tiers of vanilla bean and raspberry with buttercream frosting, decorated with handcrafted sugar roses that looked so real you'd think they were fresh from the garden. Gerald had spent months planning the design with me. We had gone through countless sketches and flavor tastings. He had shown me photos of the sugar work in progress, and I had never seen anything so beautiful. This wasn't just a cake. It was a work of art that would be the centerpiece of our reception. But Madison saw things differently. To her, my wedding was just another party, and my careful budgeting was just me being selfish with money that should be helping family. The confrontation came on a Tuesday evening 2 weeks before my wedding. I was at home addressing the last of our invitations when Madison showed up unannounced. She had a key to my apartment because I had given her one years ago for emergencies, and she had never bothered to ask before using it. She walked into my living room like she owned the place, threw her designer purse onto my coffee table, and sat down across from me with that expectant look I knew so well. "So I've been looking at condos," she announced without any preamble. "I found the perfect one. It's in that new building downtown with the rooftop pool and the fitness center. 2 bedrooms, 2 baths, granite countertops, stainless steel appliances. Everything a girl could want." I kept addressing envelopes, hoping this conversation wasn't going where I thought it was going. "That sounds nice, Madison. Are you planning to get roommates to help with the rent?" She laughed like I had said something funny. "Rent? Beverly, I'm not going to rent. You're going to buy it for me. Consider it my graduation and birthday present combined. I put down my pen and looked at her. Really looked at her. She was sitting there in clothes that cost more than most people's monthly grocery budget. Her hair freshly highlighted, her nails perfectly manicured. She had never worked a day in her life beyond the occasional summer internship that Dad's connections had arranged for her. Madison, I can't buy you a condo. Do you have any idea how much those units cost? Around $300,000, but you can afford it. You make good money, and it's not like you have kids or anything expensive to pay for. I stared at her in disbelief. I'm getting married in 2 weeks. I've spent $35,000 on this wedding. Robert and I are trying to save for our own house. But that's different, she said, waving her hand dismissively. That's for you. This is for family. Besides, all my sorority sisters got apartments or condos from their families when they graduated. Sarah's parents bought her a 3-bedroom penthouse. Jessica's family got her that cute place near the river. I can't be the only one still living at home. Then maybe you should get a job and start saving like everyone else has to do. The look that crossed Madison's face was one I had seen many times before, but it still made my stomach clench with anxiety. It was the look that meant tears and drama and phone calls from our parents were coming. I can't believe you're being so selfish, she said, her voice rising. After everything our family has done for you, after all the support you've gotten over the years, you won't help me when I really need it? What support? I asked, genuinely confused. I've been financially independent since I graduated college. I've never asked Mom and Dad for money. Emotional support, she snapped. Love and encouragement. And now when I need you to be a good sister, you're too worried about your precious wedding to care about my future. The guilt trip was so familiar I could have recited it along with her. But this time, something was different. Maybe it was the stress of wedding planning, or maybe I was finally reaching my breaking point, but I felt my backbone straightening instead of crumbling. Madison, I love you, but I cannot and will not buy you a condo. If you want to live downtown, you need to get a job and figure out how to afford it yourself. She stood up so fast that she knocked over my stack of addressed invitations. Fine. Then don't expect me to come to your stupid wedding. I'll tell everyone that my own sister cares more about her party than her family. With that, she grabbed her purse and stormed out, slamming the door so hard that my neighbor's dog started barking. 20 minutes later, my phone rang. It was Mom. Beverly, what did you say to Madison? She just called me crying, saying you refused to help her and told her not to come to the wedding. I explained the situation as calmly as I could, but Mom was already in full protective mode. Honey, you know how Madison gets when she's disappointed. She's been looking forward to having her own place, and now she feels like you don't care about her dreams. Can't you just help her this once? You're doing so well financially. Mom, I don't have $300,000 lying around. I've spent everything I had saved on this wedding. What about a loan? Or maybe you could co-sign for her like you did with the car? Before I could answer, Dad got on the line. Beverly, your sister looks up to you so much. You've always been her role model. Don't disappoint her now when she needs you most. The conversation went on for another hour, with both of them taking turns trying to convince me that helping Madison was not only the right thing to do, but my responsibility as the older sister who had been blessed with financial success. By the time I hung up, I was exhausted and questioning myself. Maybe I was being selfish. Maybe I should find a way to help her. Maybe this was what family was supposed to do for each other. That night, Robert found me crying over my laptop as I looked at my bank accounts and tried to figure out if there was any way to make it work. What if I cancel the honeymoon? I asked him. And maybe we could return some of the wedding decorations I haven't used yet. If I take out a loan against my 401k and use the money we've saved for the house down payment. Robert sat down next to me and closed the laptop. Beverly, stop. You're not responsible for buying your adult sister a condo. But what if she really doesn't come to the wedding? What if this ruins our relationship forever? Then that's her choice, he said gently. You can't control other people's reactions to reasonable boundaries. But I couldn't let it go. The thought of Madison not being at my wedding, of our parents being disappointed in me, of being seen as the selfish sister who cared more about money than family, ate at me for days. Finally, I found what I thought was a compromise. I agreed to co-sign on an apartment lease for Madison and set up a $15,000 fund to help with her moving expenses and first year's rent. It wasn't the condo she wanted, but it was a nice one-bedroom place in a good neighborhood that she could afford with a part-time job. When I called her with the offer, Madison was quiet for a long moment. I guess that's better than nothing, she said finally. But I still think you're being cheap. Sarah's sister bought her that penthouse without even blinking. Madison, this is what I can afford to help with. Take it or leave it. Fine, I'll take it. And I'll come to your wedding. But don't expect me to be happy about it. That should have been my first warning sign. Madison had never been gracious about compromises, and she had a long memory when it came to feeling slighted. But I was so relieved to have the crisis resolved that I ignored the little voice in my head telling me this wasn't over. My wedding day dawned crisp and clear, with the kind of September weather that makes Colorado famous. I woke up in the hotel room I was sharing with Janet, my maid of honor and best friend since college, feeling a mixture of excitement and nerves that I assumed was normal for any bride. Janet was already up, coffee in hand, scrolling through her phone. "Good morning, beautiful bride," she said with a grin. "Ready for the best day of your life?" I stretched and smiled, feeling some of the tension I had been carrying for weeks start to melt away. "I think I actually am. How are you feeling about your maid of honor duties?" "Piece of cake," she said, then paused. "Speaking of cake, I saw them delivering yours yesterday during the rehearsal dinner. Gerald outdid himself. It's absolutely stunning." My heart swelled with pride and anticipation. After months of planning and the drama with Madison, I was finally going to have my perfect wedding day. The cake was going to be the centerpiece of the reception, and I couldn't wait to see everyone's faces when they saw it. "Have you heard from Madison this morning?" Janet asked casually, but I caught the slight tension in her voice. "No, why?" "I saw her at the hotel bar last night with some of her college friends. She seemed, I don't know, not exactly in a celebratory mood for someone whose sister is getting married today." I felt that familiar knot of anxiety start to form in my stomach. "What do you mean?" "She was just very quiet, kind of standoffish. When I went over to say hello, she was polite but cold. I asked if she was excited about today, and she just shrugged and said something about hoping the weather held up. I tried to push down the worry. Madison had agreed to come to the wedding, and she was going to be walking down the aisle as one of my bridesmaids. Whatever her feelings about the condo situation, surely she wouldn't let it affect my wedding day. The morning flew by in a whirlwind of hair appointments, makeup, photographs, and the controlled chaos that comes with getting 6 bridesmaids ready at the same time. Madison arrived at the salon on time, but Janet had been right about her mood. She was polite but distant, participating in the group photos and activities, but not really engaging with anyone. When the photographer asked us all to gather for sister photos, Madison stood next to me and smiled on cue, but I could feel the coolness radiating from her. I tried to catch her eye, to give her a smile that said I loved her and was glad she was there, but she was looking everywhere except at me. "Madison," I said quietly during a break in the photo session, "I'm so glad you're here. It means everything to me." She looked at me for the first time all morning, and for just a moment I saw something in her eyes that made my heart skip. It wasn't sadness or disappointment. It was something harder, more calculated. "Yeah, well, someone has to witness this overpriced party," she said with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. Before I could respond, the photographer was calling us back for more pictures, and the moment passed. The ceremony venue was a historic mansion, with gardens that had been transformed into something out of a fairy tale. White roses and baby's breath lined the aisle, and chairs for our 150 guests were arranged in perfect rows facing an archway covered in climbing jasmine. As I stood in the bridal suite putting the finishing touches on my dress and veil, I could hear the string quartet warming up outside and the excited chatter of arriving guests. Robert was somewhere in the building, probably pacing nervously with his groomsmen, and in just 1 hour we would be married. Janet peeked out the window. "Your cake just arrived at the reception hall," she reported. "Gerald is over there personally supervising the setup. He looks like a proud father." I felt a thrill of anticipation. The reception hall was in a separate building on the property, connected by a beautiful, covered walkway lined with fairy lights. Our guests would move there after the ceremony for cocktails and dinner, and the cake cutting would be the highlight of the evening. The ceremony itself went perfectly. Madison walked down the aisle ahead of me, looking beautiful in her pale pink bridesmaid dress, smiling at the guests, and playing her part flawlessly. When it was my turn, I practically floated down the aisle to Robert, who looked so handsome in his black tuxedo that I almost cried right there. We exchanged vows we had written ourselves, rings that had belonged to his grandmother, and a kiss that felt like the beginning of our real life together. The guests cheered. The photographer captured every moment, and for those 20 minutes, everything in my world was exactly as it should be. The cocktail hour was a blur of congratulations, hugs, and champagne toasts. Madison mingled with the other guests, chatting with our cousins and family friends, and seemed to be in better spirits. I began to relax, thinking that maybe I had been worrying about nothing. But as we moved into the reception hall for dinner, I noticed Madison gravitating toward the dessert table, where my beautiful cake stood in all its 4-tiered glory. She stood there for a long time, champagne glass in hand, just staring at it with an expression I couldn't quite read from across the room. The reception was everything I had dreamed it would be. The band was perfect, playing a mix of classic love songs and dance music that kept everyone on their feet. The food was delicious, the flowers were stunning, and our guests were having the time of their lives. Robert and I had our first dance to At Last by Etta James, and I felt like I was floating in his arms. When the song ended, our parents joined us for the traditional parent dances, and I danced with Dad while Robert danced with his mother. "I'm so proud of you, sweetheart," Dad whispered in my ear as we swayed to the music. "You look beautiful, and Robert is a lucky man." "Thanks, Dad. I'm so happy you and Mom are here to share this with me. We wouldn't miss it for the world. And I'm glad Madison worked things out with you. Family is the most important thing." I glanced over his shoulder to where Madison was sitting at the head table, picking at her dinner and looking bored. She had been quiet during the toasts, applauding politely but not really engaging with the celebration around her. As the evening progressed, I found myself keeping one eye on Madison even as I tried to enjoy my party. There was something about her energy that felt off, like she was waiting for something or planning something. I told myself I was being paranoid, that the stress of the wedding and our recent conflict was making me overly sensitive. The time for the cake-cutting ceremony arrived at 9:30, right on schedule. Our wedding coordinator gathered everyone around the dessert table, and the photographer positioned himself for the perfect shot. Gerald, the cake artist, stood off to the side beaming with pride as guests admired his creation. "Ladies and gentlemen," the band leader announced over the microphone, "please gather around as Beverly and Robert cut their beautiful wedding cake." The crowd pressed in closer, phones and cameras ready to capture the moment. Robert and I made our way to the table, hand in hand, both of us grinning at the crowd of loved ones surrounding us. The cake was even more stunning up close than it had been in Gerald's portfolio photos. 4 perfect tiers rose from the table like a tower of edible art. The bottom layer was decorated with intricate piped buttercream roses, while the second tier featured delicate sugar work that looked like real lace. The third tier had cascading fondant ribbons, and the top tier was crowned with a spray of sugar roses, so realistic I wanted to smell them. 4 months of planning, Gerald said quietly to me as I admired his work. Worth every penny, and worth every hour. This is my masterpiece. I squeezed his hand gratefully. It's absolutely perfect. Thank you for making my vision come to life. Robert picked up the silver cake knife we had received as a wedding gift, and I placed my hand over his. The photographer crouched down to get the perfect angle, and our guests quieted down in anticipation. "Okay, everyone smile," the photographer called out. "This is the shot that's going in the album." Just as we positioned the knife over the bottom tier of the cake, I noticed Madison moving closer to the table. She was holding her champagne glass, and there was something about the way she was walking that made alarm bells go off in my head. She was weaving slightly, as if she'd had too much to drink, but I had been watching her all evening and knew she'd only had 2 glasses of champagne. Her movement seemed exaggerated, almost theatrical. "Madison, careful," I called out, but my voice was lost in the excited chatter of our guests. What happened next seemed to unfold in slow motion. Madison took another step toward the table, her foot appearing to catch on absolutely nothing, and she stumbled forward dramatically. Her champagne glass flew from her hand, splashing golden liquid across her pink dress and mine. But she didn't stop there. Her stumble became a fall, and she reached out as if trying to catch herself, her hands grasping for the edge of the dessert table. The table shook. The beautiful 4-tiered cake, 4 months of Gerald's artistic work, $5,000 of my carefully saved money, wobbled precariously. "No!" I screamed, but it was too late. The cake tilted, then toppled, crashing to the floor in an explosion of buttercream, fondant, and sugar roses. Pieces of cake flew everywhere, splattering the guests in the front row, coating the floor in a slippery mess of frosting and crumbs. For 3 seconds, the entire reception hall was completely silent. 150 people stood frozen, staring at the wreckage of what had been a work of art just moments before. Then Madison stood up, brushing cake crumbs off her dress with perfectly steady hands. She looked around at the shocked faces, at the destroyed cake, at me standing there covered in frosting with my mouth hanging open. And she smiled. Not a sheepish, embarrassed smile of someone who had just caused a terrible accident. Not an apologetic smile of someone who felt bad about ruining the most important moment of my wedding. She smiled with satisfaction, like someone who had just accomplished exactly what they set out to do. "Oops," she said, her voice carrying clearly in the silent room. "Sorry about that." The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, but was probably only a few more seconds. I stood there staring at Madison, cake frosting dripping from my dress, unable to process what had just happened. Then the chaos began. Gerald let out a sound that was somewhere between a sob and a wail. "My masterpiece," he moaned, dropping to his knees beside the ruins of his creation. 4 months of work. My sugar roses. My lacework. Several guests rushed forward to help with the cleanup, their fancy shoes slipping on the slick frosting that now covered a 10-foot radius around the dessert table. Children started crying at the sudden loud noise and disruption. The photographer, to his credit, kept shooting, capturing the disaster for posterity. Robert stood beside me, his face a mask of shock and growing anger. "What the hell just happened?" he said quietly, his voice tight with control. But before I could answer, Mom was there, immediately going into damage control mode. "Oh, honey, accidents happen," she said loudly, shooting meaningful looks at the guests who were staring and whispering. "You know how Madison gets when she's disappointed? She's been so emotional about graduation and everything." Dad appeared beside her, forcing a laugh that sounded strained and artificial. "Well, that's one way to make the wedding memorable. Right, folks? We'll be talking about this for years." Janet jumped into action, coordinating with the venue staff to get the mess cleaned up. "Let's move everyone back to their tables," she announced, with the authority of someone who had spent years managing corporate events. "The show must go on. I'm sure the kitchen has some backup dessert options." As the crowd slowly dispersed and the cleanup crew appeared with mops and towels, I continued to stand there staring at Madison. She was accepting napkins from concerned guests, playing up the role of the clumsy sister who had accidentally ruined the wedding cake. "I'm so sorry, Beverly," she said loud enough for everyone to hear. "You know how clumsy I can be. I hope you can forgive me." But her eyes told a different story. There was no remorse there, no genuine apology. There was something that looked almost like triumph. "Madison," I said quietly, my voice barely audible over the commotion around us. "Did you do that on purpose?" "What?" she said, her voice rising with theatrical indignation. "Beverly, how can you even ask that? I would never deliberately ruin your wedding. I love you." But I had seen that smile. I had watched her move toward the table with deliberate steps. I had noticed how quickly she had recovered from her supposed stumble, how steady her hands had been as she brushed off her dress. This wasn't an accident. This was revenge for the condo she didn't get, for the years of what she saw as my selfishness, for every time she felt like she had been denied something she deserved. The venue staff managed to clean up most of the cake debris, and someone found a small backup cake in the kitchen that Robert and I could cut for photos. The band started playing again, trying to restore the party atmosphere, and gradually our guests returned to dancing and celebrating. But the mood had shifted. People kept glancing over at me to see how I was handling the disaster. I could hear whispered conversations about whether it had really been an accident, about the family drama that everyone had sensed but nobody wanted to acknowledge directly. Madison acted like nothing had happened. She changed into a spare dress that Mom had somehow produced from her car, and she spent the rest of the evening dancing with her college friends and charming our relatives with stories about her graduation and her plans for the future. I went through the motions of being a happy bride. I danced with Robert. I thanked our guests for coming. I smiled for more photos by the small replacement cake. But inside, I was planning. During our first dance after the cake incident, Robert held me close and whispered in my ear, "That wasn't an accident, was it?" "No," I whispered back. "It wasn't." "What are you going to do?" I looked over his shoulder at Madison, who was laughing at something one of our cousins had said, acting for all the world like she hadn't just deliberately destroyed the centerpiece of my wedding reception. "Something I should have done years ago," I said. The rest of the evening passed in a blur. Madison left early with her friends, not bothering to say goodbye or offer another apology. Mom and Dad made excuses for her to anyone who would listen, explaining about graduation stress and how emotional she'd been lately. By 11 o'clock, most of our guests had gone home, and Robert and I were finally alone in our hotel suite. I sat on the bed, still in my wedding dress, laptop open in front of me, while Robert loosened his tie and sat down beside me. "What are you doing?" he asked. "Making some phone calls," I said, scrolling through my contacts. It's time Madison learned about consequences. At 10:30 that night, I made the first call that would change everything. "Mountain View Apartments, emergency line," came the voice of the night manager. This is Beverly Martinez, I said, my voice steady and calm. I need to cancel the lease co-signing agreement for Madison Patterson immediately. There was a pause. Ms. Martinez, are you sure? Ms. Patterson is scheduled to move in next week. We've already processed the paperwork. I'm absolutely certain. I want my name removed from all documents related to her lease, effective immediately. Can I ask what prompted this change? We'll need to notify Ms. Patterson that without a co-signer, she'll need to qualify for the apartment on her own income. That's between me and my sister, I said. Just remove my name from everything. After I hung up, I called my bank's 24-hour customer service line. First National Bank, how can I help you? I need to freeze a savings account that I set up for someone else. The account number is... I rattled off the numbers for the $15,000 moving fund I had created for Madison. I'll need to verify your identity, the representative said, and after going through the security questions, she confirmed the freeze. The account is now locked. No withdrawals can be made without your authorization. Robert watched me make these calls with a mixture of pride and concern. Are you sure about this? He asked when I hung up the phone. I've never been more sure of anything in my life, I said. She deliberately destroyed my wedding cake, Robert. She stood there and smiled about it. She planned this whole thing because she was angry about not getting a condo. I know, and I'm proud of you for finally standing up to her. I just want to make sure you're ready for the fallout. I looked at him, this man I had just married. This partner who had watched me be taken advantage of by my family for years without ever pressuring me to change. I'm ready, more than ready. I spent the next hour researching Madison's financial situation. I had been supporting her in various ways for so long that I had a clear picture of her expenses and income. Without my co-signature, she wouldn't qualify for the apartment. Without the moving fund, she couldn't afford the deposits and first month's rent, even if she found a place that would accept her limited credit history. For the first time in my adult life, I was setting a boundary with my sister, and sticking to it, regardless of the consequences. The next morning, we were barely back from our brief overnight honeymoon when my phone started ringing. The first call came at 8:15 a.m. It was Mom, and she was hysterical. Beverly, what did you do? Madison called me crying, saying she can't get her apartment. The rental office told her you canceled your co-signature. That's correct, I said calmly. I did cancel it. But why? She needs that apartment. She's supposed to move out of our house next week. Mom, Madison deliberately destroyed my wedding cake last night. It wasn't an accident. How can you say that? You saw what happened. She tripped and fell. It was an accident. It was planned revenge because I wouldn't buy her a condo. I saw her face afterward, Mom. She was proud of what she did. There was silence on the other end of the line, and for a moment I thought maybe Mom was finally seeing the truth about her younger daughter. But then she said, Beverly, you're being dramatic. Madison would never do something like that on purpose. She's your sister. She loves you. If she loves me, she has a funny way of showing it. You can't abandon family over a cake. I'm not abandoning anyone, I said firmly. I'm setting boundaries. Madison is 22 years old. It's time she learned to support herself. 20 minutes later, Dad called with the same arguments. Then Madison called, sobbing and pleading. Beverly, please. I'll apologize to everyone. I'll pay for a new cake. I didn't mean for it to happen. Madison, you looked me in the eye and smiled after you destroyed 4 months of Gerald's work and $5,000 of my money. I was nervous. I didn't know what else to do. I was embarrassed. You weren't embarrassed. You were satisfied. Please don't do this to me. I need that apartment. I can't stay with Mom and Dad forever. Then get a job and earn it like everyone else has to do. She hung up on me, but not before I heard her call me a selfish bitch. The calls continued throughout the day. Extended family members who had been at the wedding and heard about the situation. Friends of Madison's who couldn't believe I would abandon my sister over an accident. Even some of my own friends who thought I was overreacting. But Robert stood by me through every call, every guilt trip, every attempt to make me change my mind. You're doing the right thing, he kept saying. It's about time. By the end of the day, I was emotionally exhausted but more determined than ever. For 29 years, I had been the family peacekeeper, the one who gave in to keep everyone happy. I had enabled Madison's entitled behavior and allowed my parents to treat her like she could do no wrong. But that was ending now. Little did I know that the real shock was still to come. The call that changed everything came at exactly 10:30 the next morning. I was in the kitchen making coffee and thinking about how quiet the house felt, without the constant drama of wedding planning when my phone rang. It was Janet. Beverly, you need to see something, she said without preamble. Can you meet me at the venue? The manager found something you're going to want to know about. What kind of something? Just come. Trust me, you need to see this in person. An hour later, I was sitting in the venue manager's office, watching security footage on his computer screen. Janet sat beside me, her face grim, while the manager fast-forwarded through hours of reception footage. Here, he said, stopping the video. Watch this section carefully. The timestamp showed 9:25 p.m., 5 minutes before the cake-cutting ceremony. On the screen, I could see Madison standing near the dessert table, looking around to make sure no one was watching her. She walked closer to the cake, studying it from different angles. Then she stepped back and appeared to be calculating something, looking at the distance between herself and the table, the position of the guests, the location of the photographer. Keep watching, Janet said quietly. At 9:28, Madison moved to what appeared to be a predetermined position about 6 feet from the cake table. She took a sip of her champagne, set her shoulders, and waited. When the cake-cutting ceremony began and everyone gathered around, Madison began her approach. But this wasn't the stumbling, drunken weaving I had seen in person. On the security footage, her movements were deliberate and calculated. She waited until the photographer was in position, until Robert and I had the knife positioned over the cake, until she knew everyone's attention would be focused on the moment of the, quote, accident. Then she executed her plan perfectly. The fake stumble, the theatrical grab for the table, the perfectly timed fall that sent my beautiful cake crashing to the floor. And then, just as I remembered, she stood up with that satisfied smile and delivered her Oscar-worthy, "Oops. I can't believe this," I whispered, watching my sister deliberately destroy the centerpiece of my wedding reception. She actually planned this whole thing. There's more, the manager said, fast-forwarding to later in the evening. Watch what happens after she changes clothes. The footage showed Madison in her spare dress, dancing and laughing with her friends. At one point, she was caught on camera talking to one of her college friends, and even without audio, her body language was clearly celebratory. She was gesturing toward where the cake table had been, throwing her head back in laughter and high-fiving her friend like she had just pulled off the prank of the century. She's bragging about it, Janet said, her voice tight with anger. She's actually proud of what she did. I sat there staring at the screen, watching my sister celebrate the destruction of my wedding cake, and felt something inside me break, and then immediately crystallize into something harder and clearer than I had ever felt before. This wasn't just about a cake. This wasn't even just about the condo. This was about years of entitlement, years of believing that she deserved whatever she wanted regardless of the cost to other people. Years of our parents enabling her behavior and teaching her that there would never be real consequences for her actions. I need copies of this footage, I said to the manager. Already done, he replied, handing me a flash drive. What happened to your cake was deliberate destruction of property. If you want to press charges, I might, I said, surprised by how calm I felt. Let me think about it. As Janet and I walked to our car, she shook her head in disbelief. I've known Madison since she was 15, and I always thought she was just spoiled. But this is something else entirely. This is who she's always been, I said. I just refused to see it because I wanted to believe she was capable of change. What are you going to do now? I'm going to show this video to my parents. And then I'm going to make sure Madison understands that actions have consequences. That afternoon, I drove to my parents' house for what I knew would be one of the most difficult conversations of my life. Mom and Dad were in the living room, and Madison was there too, still playing the victim and complaining about how unfairly I was treating her. Beverly, Mom said as soon as I walked in. I am so glad you're here. Madison has been telling us how sorry she is about the accident, and we think you should reconsider helping her with the apartment. It wasn't an accident, I said, pulling out my laptop, and I can prove it. I set up the computer on their coffee table and played the security footage. All three of them watched in silence as Madison's deliberate plan unfolded on the screen. When the video ended, the room was completely quiet for a long moment. Dad was the first to speak. Madison, he said slowly, did you do this on purpose? Madison's face had gone pale, but she was still trying to maintain her innocence. No. I mean, yes, I was upset about the condo, but I didn't plan to knock over the cake. It was still an accident. Madison, I said quietly, we can all see you calculating the distance and timing your approach. We can see you celebrating afterward with your friends. Mom was staring at her younger daughter like she was seeing her for the first time. Madison, tell me the truth. Did you deliberately ruin Beverly's wedding cake? For a moment, I thought Madison might continue lying. But something in Mom's voice, or maybe the undeniable evidence on the screen, finally broke through her defenses. Fine, she exploded. Yes, I did it on purpose. Are you happy now? I was angry about the condo, and I wanted Beverly to know how it felt to have something special ruined. The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. You destroyed your sister's wedding cake because you were angry about not getting a $300,000 condo? Dad said, his voice barely above a whisper. She had the money? She could have helped me, but she chose to spend it on a stupid party instead. That stupid party was my wedding, I said. The most important day of my life. And what about my life? What about what I need? I'm tired of everyone acting like Beverly is so perfect while I get nothing. You get nothing. I stood up. 29 years of suppressed frustration, finally finding its voice. Madison, I have given you thousands of dollars over the years. I co-signed your car loan. I helped pay your college tuition. I bought you clothes and electronics and vacations. I set up a $15,000 moving fund for you just last month. That wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough, I said, finally understanding the truth. Because you don't want help, Madison. You want everything handed to you without having to work for any of it. And when someone finally says no to you, you destroy their happiness out of spite. Mom was crying now, and Dad looked like he had aged 10 years in the past 10 minutes. I think you should leave, Dad said to Madison, his voice heavy with disappointment. Go to your room and think about what you've done. This is ridiculous, Madison shouted. You're all acting like I committed murder. It was just a stupid cake. Get out, I said quietly. Get out before I decide to press charges for deliberate destruction of property. After Madison stormed upstairs, slamming her bedroom door like a teenager, I sat down with my parents and had the most honest conversation we'd ever had about their younger daughter. How did we miss this? Mom asked through her tears. How did we raise a child who could do something so cruel? You didn't miss it, I said gently. You just made excuses for it every time it happened. Madison has been getting away with selfish, destructive behavior her entire life because you always found ways to justify it. Dad nodded slowly. You're right. We failed both of you. We failed Madison by not teaching her accountability. And we failed you by expecting you to always be the one who gave in to keep the peace. It was the first time in my life that my parents had acknowledged the unfair dynamic that had shaped our family for decades. What happens now? Mom asked. Now Madison learns to take care of herself, I said. I'm not co-signing any more loans. I'm not giving her any more money. And I'm not accepting any more apologies that aren't backed up by changed behavior. 3 months later, Madison was working at a retail job and living with 3 roommates in a small apartment across town. She had been forced to take public transportation because she couldn't afford her car payments without my co-signature. It wasn't easy for any of us. Madison went through a period of rage, then self-pity, then finally something that might have been the beginning of self-reflection. Mom and Dad struggled with learning how to support their younger daughter without enabling her destructive patterns. But slowly, very slowly, something started to change. Madison began calling me not to ask for money or favors, but to actually talk. She started taking responsibility for her actions instead of making excuses. She even entered therapy to work on what she called her entitlement issues. I was jealous of you for so long, she told me during one of our first real conversations in years. Everyone always talked about how responsible and successful you were, and I felt like I could never measure up. So I decided that instead of trying to earn things, I would just demand them. And when I finally said no, I wanted to hurt you the way I felt hurt. I wanted to ruin something that mattered to you, because I felt like you had ruined something that mattered to me. It wasn't a perfect reconciliation. Trust takes time to rebuild, and Madison still had moments of falling back into old patterns. But for the first time in our lives, we were relating to each other as equals, instead of as the giver and the taker. My marriage to Robert grew stronger through the whole experience. He had watched me find my backbone and stand up for myself, and I had learned that real love doesn't require you to sacrifice your own well-being to keep other people happy. And every time I looked at our wedding photos, I remembered not just the cake that was destroyed, but the moment I finally decided that my happiness and self-respect were worth protecting. The story of Madison and the wedding cake became family legend, not as a funny anecdote about wedding disasters, but as the turning point when we all learned that love without boundaries isn't really love at all. Sometimes the people we love most need us to love them less indulgently and more wisely. Sometimes the greatest gift we can give someone is the opportunity to face the consequences of their choices and grow from them. And sometimes, protecting your own happiness is the most loving thing you can do for everyone involved. What do you think? Have you ever had to set difficult boundaries with family members who took advantage of your generosity? Let me know in the comments below. And don't forget to hit that like button if this story resonated with you. Subscribe for more real-life stories about family dynamics, relationships, and finding the courage to stand up for yourself. Share this video with anyone who might be struggling with similar family situations, because sometimes we all need to hear that it's okay to say no to people we love. Thank you for listening to my story, and I hope it helps you navigate your own family challenges with wisdom and strength.